Hi everyone. As part of the flip lecture, what I promised to do was to provide you a little bit more information about the context around the lesson plan, or just kind of clear up a few areas for you, hopefully. Again, please, you guys, the first thing that you need to do is please look at the lesson plan template that is on the first page of our Blackboard site. I really think, again, we have been very, very descriptive on what every single part, and when I would build the lesson plan, I would just put every one of these bolded parts in your lesson plan. That's how your lesson plan should be organized. One question that we're having, or that, I know you're not struggling with, but it's so important because it's part of what we do in education today, and you just have to do it, is the alignment to standards. And so again, just as a reminder, look under the content standards that we have provided. Please, 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 the first thing that you should do, and I know I've used these probably interchangeably too much, but what you really need to be doing is you need to be looking at the Iowa Core. I know I've said the Common Core, but, and I apologize for that, but in my head, the Common Core to me is the Iowa Core because that's what we've used. Some of you aren't maybe thinking about teaching in Iowa. If you're not, then I think it's okay to go to the Common Core or whatever, but the Common Core just has standards for literacy and math. The Iowa Core, you guys, you can browse by subject. So they have the Iowa Core for literacy, math, science, social studies. They even have 21st century skills. But once you pick, like if I go to social studies, then I can just go to my grade level that I'm planning my lesson plan for. So if I'm doing grade 5, here are my choices in terms of social studies. So I would really try to align with the Iowa Core. Now, if you can't, we do have, those of you in ECE, you can definitely use the Iowa Early Learning Standards, but we do have other standards like the National Math Standards, the National Social Studies Standards, and so forth. You can go back and use those, but we would like you to first look at the core, Iowa Core, okay? Next, just a few tips on some of the parts, okay? The first one is we have a special part in our lesson plan called Description of Instructional Context. You guys, usually you would not have to do that in a lesson plan, okay? And so, but I think it's important for you at this point in time to really think about, okay, what's this going to look like? Because we don't have a classroom for you right now to do it, okay? So we want you, and this is part of, you don't have to do a reflection for the lesson plan, but this is kind of being reflective, okay? So you have to describe here, what do you think the environment will look like, okay? So first, especially when you're using technology, you need to address what are the resources that will need to be available for your lesson, and we want you to describe them here. Are you going to have one computer in a classroom and that's it? All you're going to do is an interactive whiteboard lesson or something like that. Um, Maybe you're just going, in lab this last week, you guys had the opportunity of, you worked in pairs. So you don't need a computer for every student. Maybe you're going to have a laptop cart like you do in lab, come into your classroom. That's a model that's very real. And you're only going to need 10 laptops because your students are going to share, or you're going to need 15 because you have 30 students in the class, okay? So you can have whatever you want, but you need to describe that here and what that's going to look like. Maybe you're still working off of a computer lab model where you're going to take your students down to the computer lab. Although I will say, you guys, I think that's a model of the past. We still have districts that do that, but I think more and more it's the technology is mobile and it comes into your classroom. The second part of this, and this is where this is hard. This is hard, but again, we at least want you to think about differentiation in your lesson. We want you to discuss the ability level of your students and what provisions you'll make for varying that student abilities and the possible learning challenges that you'll have. So we want you to describe the context. You guys, you're not going to have 25 students working at the same ability. You're going to have gifted, you're going to have just students, regular students, ability level. You're going to have some students with special needs in your classroom. So what we want to do is we want you just to describe that a little bit so that you kind of, can give us, what you're trying to differentiate in that lesson and so forth. And then the last thing here is, this is almost like a prereq. Please tell us what your students have done before so that we understand, okay, if they've never used Educreations before, or if they've never used iMovie before, your lesson is going to look a lot different, okay? So just tell us, you can say, the students already know you've done a lesson on how to use Educreations, you've done a lesson on iMovie, or they've done other movies, whatever. Then we know that you didn't have to do any more instruction on how do you use the technology or even the content too. So just kind of think about prereqs. What do your students already know what to do before they do this lesson plan, okay? So much thought has to be put into this instructional context section, okay? It's a little bit tricky to navigate, but again, this is where we're trying to get you to think about, if I were to really, really do this lesson plan in my classroom, these are the things that I would have to think about, okay? Another tip is on the procedures. You guys, when this is the guts of the lesson plan. This is the fun part, really, because here's where you're telling us what's going to happen in the lesson. Okay, so these are the detailed set of directions for conducting the lesson. I always tell people what you want to do is you want to make these detailed enough so that you can hand them to anybody. You can hand them to a non-teacher, and they would be able to walk into that room and teach that lesson. Okay, I want them that detailed. So do you have to script it word for word? You don't. Okay, you don't have to exactly, but I would say you have to be close to that. It can't be just little descriptors going through. We want enough detail that we really know what you're saying, what questions are you asking, what, how are your students being organized, the whole ball game, okay? And you can do this in different ways. So number one, you could just do bulleted list of the steps that you're taking, or you can number them, but step by step, and that's just chunking, the steps of the lesson plan. It can be scripted. In that case, it's probably have an opening, you present the content, you have guided practice, independent practice, you have a closing, you can do it that way. I know those of you in 245, 268, I think Dr. Carlson uses she chunks it into, this is what I do, this is what we do, and this is what you do. So it's like the teacher modeling, this is guided practice, and this is independent practice. That's okay too, if that's how you want to organize. And there are others. I know somebody mentioned in lecture about the Madeline Hunter model, and that's more with the anticipatory set, and there's parts to that as well. So I'm open to any of these or all of these. You don't want to do them all, but pick one and then go with it. But that's the procedures part. That's where we want to hear about, what you're going to do. Now, you might think, oh wow, that's going to be long. Well, it is, but it takes a lot of description. So, keep in mind that's what you're doing here. There's also a section on role of technology. You guys, for this is kind of your reflective piece again. And this is the part where we want you to kind of think about, okay, what's the role of technology? Take a step back from the lesson and then really think about how well did you do to use technology in a way that it meaningfully interacts technology, the pedagogy, how you're teaching it, and the content that you're teaching. And then just talk about that a little bit, and these are just guiding questions. You don't have to answer question by question by question here. We just want you to think about, what do you see as the role of technology in this lesson plan, and then reflect on it a little bit. Did it promote collaborative learning? Was it were the learners reflective? Were they engaged? Could it have been done just as easily without the technology? Then if that's it, we're probably, and that's okay, but then you're probably not at the point of TPAC lesson plan, okay? So this is kind of your mini reflection, especially with the use of technology within this lesson plan. And so just talk about that a little bit. And then the last time, I know that you know this one pretty well, but because we talked about it in lecture pretty well at length, is just remember, write good, crisp learning objectives, and then remember to go back and connect your assessment. Your assessment will be designed according to those objectives. Okay, so hopefully those are a few more tips for you as you work on your lesson plan. I know a lot of you are really working on them hard. Thank you very much. That's great, because again, this is an artifact for your course portfolio, and we want you to do well on that. Okay, just a reminder, look at the assessment that we have for the lesson plan, and it is more of a checklist. It's not really a rubric. It's kind of that modified rubric, but as was mentioned in lecture, do a self-assessment and see how you're doing on it, and that will help you guide in, what do you need to do maybe better within the plan. Okay? Okay, so we will, next I'll talk about the flipped lecture, but hopefully these are some tips that will help you in planning your lesson plan.